Olá, Tutameia está ao vivo, transmitindo diretamente dos nossos estúdios domésticos, com a Eleonora.
O Rodolfo.
E de lá da tela, conversa conosco hoje, diretamente dos Estados Unidos, o jornalista Sam Hussein, que você acompanhou o trabalho dele na semana passada, mas a Eleonora faz agora, então, a apresentação de nosso convidado, e para iniciarmos essa entrevista no dia da posse de Donald Trump.
Sam Hussein, thank you very much for joining us today. I will present you a little bit in Portuguese. Sam Hussein é jornalista, artista plástico também, ele atua em vários órgãos de imprensa, é uma jornalista independente, e estava entrevistando Anthony Blinken quando foi violentamente retirado da entrevista.
So, Sam, before your comments about what happened and what are your thoughts about freedom of press in Brazil, I'll just show a short video showing what happened last week in Washington, so that everybody is in the same page about it. Just bear with us.
Unjustly held hostage and bringing them home, returning them to their families, returning them to their loved ones. Finally,
get your hands off me! 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 Answer a damn question. You know about the Hannibal Directive, you know about Israel's nuclear weapons, everybody from the ICJ. I'm sitting here quietly, and now I'm being manhandled by 2 or 3 people. You pontificate about a free press. You pontificate about a free press. You are hurting me. You are hurting me. You are hurting me. I am asking questions after being told by Matt Miller that he will not answer my questions until I ask.
Please, sir, respect the process.
Wasn't the point of the May 31st statement to block the ICJ orders? You blocked the ICJ orders.
Please, sir, respect the process.
Respect the process. Respect the process. While everybody from Amnesty International, to the ICJ, saying that Israel's doing genocide and extermination. You're telling me to respect the process. Criminal! Why aren't you in The Hague? Why aren't you in The Hague? Why aren't you in The Hague?
Finally, we've worked to modernize our diplomacy so that.
So, Sam, what can you tell us about this episode? What's your feeling today about what happened last week?
I think it exposes them more so as being not just duplicitous, but managing a genocide from the very beginning and even well before that. I think that this was all planned out, a massive propaganda effort, from putting out stories about beheaded babies to justify the mass slaughter of actual Palestinian babies, to sabotaging the attempts to use international law and to attack it generally. I think what I did helped elucidate that. The U.S. government has refused for decades to acknowledge, as I tried to indicate there, the existence of Israel's nuclear weapons. They will attempt to hide and deceive the public into not paying attention to the most critical of issues. And so what I was trying to just simply get questions in. I did not expect to be hauled off like that. I have, blurted out questions before when they don't ask for it. And that's the only, they have done so much to repress the possibility of meaningful questions. They've done that in 1,000 different ways. Even this news conference was called an hour beforehand, so that people like myself, independent journalists who don't have an office at the State Department, couldn't get there in time. I had to be on the lookout for the public notice and dash down there, as did Max Blumenthal, the other journalist who spoke up.
So why questioning is seen as such a menace to the establishment?
Yeah, that's a great question, a great point. I mean, they would rather have the visual, the video of me getting dragged out of there than let me have a couple of questions at Blinken. And he was so disingenuous. One of the, before the video that you showed, I just, just said, when he was talking about diplomacy, I said, "Do you recognize the Geneva Conventions as applying to Gaza?" And then when he talked about the hostages, I said, can you talk about the Hannibal Directive? Matt Miller refuses to talk about the Hannibal Directive. I asked Matt Miller, the spokesperson, who was directing the so-called security people to drag me away. I had asked him months ago about the Hannibal Directive, and he pretended not to know about it, which is ridiculous. It's an outright lie. And I asked about the Geneva Conventions in the past, and they were incredibly deceitful. The U.S. policy is basically to say that the Geneva Conventions don't apply to the Palestinians. That's their policy, but they won't say it outright, so they hide it in many ways. Another journalist, picking up on my having questioned Miller about it, got Blinken in the hallway several months ago and tried to ask him about the Geneva Conventions. And Miller and Blinken responded, "Is this on the record?" And when the journalist said, "Yes, it's on the record," they said, we don't want to answer. So, and here he is at this news conference pretending that he's, I'm happy to take questions after the Q&A. They would have taken questions from the designated journalists. Matt Miller has explicitly told me that he will not take my questions. I'm not going to be complicit in my own silencing and in the silencing of people who look to me for serious journalism.
One thing that's amazing is really the reaction of the journalists. What this, the guy that was sitting beside you, he's almost laughing, and most of the other journalists show no reaction at all. What does this tell about press in the States, or at least about the press that are in the White House or covering the White House?
Yeah, it's the State Department. I mean, I think, there are some exceptions and some mild exceptions, but a lot of them are simply careerists wanting to do what they think their editors want, what their corporate owners want. And they want to get along and have access. If they stick up for me, then they think that they'll never get called on either. It's a complete, they end up just simply being stenographers or asking only the mildest possible questions. Some journalists there who have virtually no credentials, ask questions pushing them, are you being tough enough on Iran? And they love calling on them. They call on them every day. The ones who are just putting out complete propaganda and who are actually pushing them to be more militaristic and so on. I mean, I think that they, Miller wanted to give a speech, and I think that they are incapable of actual engagement, actual debate, even though they pontificate about a free press and they pontificate about the wonders of democracy. It's the last thing they want.
And all this, do you believe that the White House or the State Department are in a way directing or misdirecting the media coverage of issues like the Palestinian question or even others?
In large part, I think that they represent many of the same interests, but I think that there's a deeper structure. For example, if by some miracle someone became president of the United States who was dedicated to peace and to international law and to fostering democracy, I suspect that the establishment media and big tech and all of them would come down so hard on that person. They would demonize them in every way possible, that they would find any possible flaw in order to undermine such a person. So I don't think it's quite as simple as simply saying that the press takes its dictates from the government, because if the government shifted and it represented different interests, I think the establishment media would remain as they are.
What can you tell us about this evolution of the American official media, or the great corporations? We saw in the history the Watergate, the Pentagon Papers, and then when we talk about the mass destruction, the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, the media has done autocritic, some kind of autocritic about that coverage. What can you tell us about now? What's happening in the mainstream media according to this all historical process?
Right. Well, I wasn't active during Watergate, of course, but
Yes.
I was very active on the Iraq weapons of mass destruction issues.
Yes.
I was one of the journalists who exposed Bush's and Cheney's lies before the invasion happened. And other journalists, did likewise. Nobody in the U.S. system, virtually nobody, who did the right thing there came out ahead. The system actually promoted the people who were the most deceitful. In large part, there was one exception with Judy Miller. But other than that, so many people across the media who propagandized about Iraq weapons of mass destruction ended up getting propelled. I think two things I think have further corrupted U.S. media, in addition to the corporate ownership and sort of assumptions of empire and so on, is the shallow partisan nature of it. It's dominated by Fox News on the one side and MSNBC and CNN on the other side, and they feed the public into hating the other side instead of directing their scrutiny towards the establishment. And that's how the establishment gets off the hook, by playing the Democratic base and the Republican base against each other, and they have their media systems on either side, so people completely focus in on that. And I think that's been very detrimental, and how the establishment has further entrenched itself. And the other factor is how big tech has, with Facebook and Twitter and other things, now largely determines what a lot of people see through their algorithm. In Google, sometimes it's a search engine, sometimes it's a hiding engine. It hides certain information. So using these technological mechanisms, they are further corrupting the discussion and making the public not understand what's happening.
So what do you believe will happen now with the media and the information and the public access to information during Trump government that's being inaugurated today?
Yeah, Trump is being inaugurated, and I noticed that Biden just pardoned Fauci, who may well have been responsible for COVID origins, as well as the January 6th committees. Liz Cheney, who has been pivotal in making the Democratic Party more of a pro-war party. Trump is coming in pretending to be America first, like he pretended to be drain the swamp last time. But who is he bringing in as Secretary of State? Marco Rubio, who is incredibly militaristic and warmongering regarding Israel, regarding Ukraine, wanting to target countries in Latin America. I'm hoping to go to Cuba in the next couple of weeks. I've never been. I think they might be a critical target, as well as possibly Venezuela, of Marco Rubio. So you have, as I say, you have this partisanship where the Republican base, they voted for America first. And what they're getting is, a right-wing version of U.S. empire. Some of them want that, but I think a lot of them don't. They would want to bring the troops home, get rid of all of these U.S. military bases, and build up the U.S. infrastructure and make it a normal country instead of an empire. So I think that Trump has sort of deceived many on the right, the same way that I perceive that Obama and Biden and Clinton before them deceived many on the left, and they end up working hand in glove to further the U.S.'s empire. So I think what's needed is actual dialogue between authentic populists on the left and right, recognizing that there are serious disagreements and differences there. And I think that it's critical that independent sources of information arise from the left.
Do you see any independent sources?
Yeah, I see some. I mean, in the aftermath of what happened to me, I've done interviews with people like you, and I've had some write-ups, but no one from the New York Times wrote up what happened very briefly, but they didn't think to call me apparently. So there's a huge problem, but I think that there is a developing structure in places on the internet. I'm developing a project called the Papers Project, where I create flyers for people to distribute. So, example, that I'm going to, of course, develop a flyer on Blinken with all of his lies, and anytime he goes to an event, people can pass it out. People have got to, in addition to, we have to use the internet, but we have to reclaim the public square, the physical public square. Imagine, timely flyers being published that people can copy and distribute as a news story is breaking, to engage their neighbors, to engage people at civic events, and so on. The United States, to the extent that it has been a democracy, has been hijacked by corporate forces and by forces of empire, and it needs to be reclaimed. And it's a struggle that needs to happen every day, creatively, intelligently, strategically. For example, one thing that I've been pushing is so many countries that have said good things on Palestine are not using the full force of their legal capacities. For example, of course, many people, including myself, pushed hard for a country to invoke the Genocide Convention at the International Court of Justice. And then South Africa finally did that in late December of 2023. And the U.S. did so much to try to undermine that. But that can be done more. The U.S. will veto anything at the UN Security Council, but countries can go to the General Assembly using what's called Uniting for Peace. So Brazil and Turkey and South Africa and Algeria and Malaysia and Indonesia, all of these countries that have made very good statements about Israel's genocide, have not utilized the full capacity of their legal options. If they get 2/3 majority, they can call on sanctions, economic sanctions on Israel. They could even call for a tribunal. They can call for Israel to be suspended. They could call for an arms embargo. They could call for a peacekeeping force. They could call for a number of things using the General Assembly. That's what was done during South Africa, because in the 1980s, the U.S. vetoed everything about South Africa, but the UN General Assembly stepped in and used Uniting for Peace. That should happen now with Palestine.
Tom, I know we are pushing your time, but I want to ask you if you can give a counsel, you can give an advice for new journalists. What can you say to the youngest people that wants to be journalists?
Sure, you have to follow your heart. Don't think of what's popular now or what you think will play. Follow your heart and then say it at the moment that it matters most. And, I generally think that people should try to focus in on a few, on a handful of subjects and know them well, rather than just be jumping from thing to thing to thing and constantly being distracted. So I hope that that's useful for people.
Great. Sam, we'd like to thank you very much for your time. I hope you are completely recovered from the aggressions you suffered.
I'm getting there. I think I'm getting there. Thank you.
E a gente agradece também a todos que estão aqui com a gente acompanhando ao vivo essa entrevista e que nos visite a qualquer momento na internet. Lembre-se de que é só buscar por Tutameia TV e você nos encontra nas várias plataformas de podcast, aqui no YouTube. Não deixe de se inscrever no nosso canal e participe também do grupo Amigos do Tutameia. O link de inscrição, de convite para esse grupo está disponível na descrição deste vídeo. E agora, então, antes do adeuzinho, do tchau, a gente volta a palavra para o nosso convidado para que mande sua mensagem para todos que estão aqui com a gente. Sam, now, just before the goodbye, I would like to have you speak your message to the people that are with us now and that will be with us anytime in the internet.
Well, thank you. I hope that people, as I indicated before, push their governments to do Uniting for Peace on Palestine. I've written about this extensively on my Substack, husseini.substack.com, how if countries around the world that are saying the right thing, that are saying Israel is committing genocide, has committed genocide, a ceasefire, whether it holds or not, is not going to solve the problem here. And the United States is going to attempt to determine the future of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And so much, there's a tremendous need for governments and for people to push their governments into doing the right thing, to put their shoulder to the wheel, to not just give rhetorical speeches that are nice, but to say, we're going to take legal action and we're going to pass resolutions in the General Assembly using Uniting for Peace to put sanctions on Israel and take other measures against Israel. I think this is a crucial thing for people around the world to do.
Great. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Obrigado.
Tchau, pessoal.
Tchau.
Thank you. Bye-bye.